Before we begin, the lawyer said, we're waiting for the other Mrs. Reynolds. Mary Reynolds had been married to her husband James for 31 years. She had buried him 3 weeks earlier, and until that morning she had no idea there was another Mrs. Reynolds at all. There would be 3 of them in the end. But to understand how Mary ended up sitting in that office, you need to know who James Reynolds had been to her first. They had met in 1992 at a corporate retreat in upstate New York. He was a tall, soft-spoken consultant from Connecticut, with kind, grey eyes and the calm of a man who never raised his voice. They married 3 years later, on a small farm in Vermont, with 22 guests and a borrowed cake. They moved into a 1908 colonial in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of house with original mouldings and floors that creaked in the winter. They had 1 son, Adam, who was now 30, living in San Francisco. For their 25th anniversary, James had given Mary a golden retriever puppy. She had named him Riley. He was, by then, 6 years old, and he leaned his full weight against Mary's leg whenever the doorbell rang. James travelled often. Boston, mostly. Quarterly engagements with regional clients. He called every evening at 7. On Sunday mornings, he would FaceTime Riley before flying home. Riley would tilt his head at the screen, and James would laugh, and Mary would feel grateful that her life had turned out so quiet. The call came on a Tuesday in October, 6:47 in the evening. Mary was washing a single coffee mug. The state trooper said her husband had been driving south on Interstate 95 when a contracting truck crossed the median. James had died at the scene. The casket would be closed. The trooper was very sorry. The funeral was small, a handful of colleagues. Adam flew in from California. Mary wore the black dress she had bought 12 years earlier for her mother's funeral and never expected to wear again. Riley sat at her feet during the service. He did not whine. He did not move. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived from Hartwell and Associates, attorneys at law in Hartford. Edward Hartwell had been James's attorney for 18 years. The letter was short. The reading of the last will and testament was scheduled for 9:30 on a Wednesday morning. Mary marked the date on the calendar in the kitchen. She did not know that this was the morning her marriage would end. Mary arrived at the law office at 9:15. Riley came with her. She had not been able to leave him alone since James died. The receptionist, a woman named Doreen, scratched Riley behind the ears and led them to the conference room on the 2nd floor. Edward Hartwell was already seated. He stood when Mary entered, took her hand in both of his, and offered the practiced condolences of a man who had read too many wills. They sat. Riley curled at Mary's feet under the table. Edward opened a folder. He looked at the door. He looked at his watch. He looked at the door again. "Before we begin," he said, "we're waiting for the other Mrs. Reynolds." Mary heard the words. Her brain did not assemble them. "I'm sorry," she said. "The other... what?" Edward's face changed. It was a small change, the kind a man makes when he realizes he has just said something terrible to a person who did not know. The door opened. A woman walked in, 46 years old, honey blonde hair pulled back at the nape of her neck, a black wool dress that did not fit quite right at the shoulders, the way mourning clothes never do. Behind her, 2 children, a boy of 14, tall and angular, a girl of 12, holding her mother's hand. The woman looked at Mary. Her eyes were already wet. "Mary," she said softly, "I thought you knew." "I'm sorry," Mary said. "I don't know who you are." The woman put her hand on her daughter's shoulder, steady, bracing. "My name is Lauren Reynolds," she said. "James was my husband." Mary did not remember the drive home. She remembered Edward's voice, distant and even, explaining that there were 2 marriage certificates in his folder. Hers, dated June 1995, Brattleboro, Vermont. Lauren's, dated September 2010, White Plains, New York. She remembered Tyler and Olivia, the children, sitting very still while the adults spoke. She remembered Riley's chin on her knee under the table. She did not remember leaving the building. She remembered pulling into her own driveway in Old Greenwich and sitting in the car for 40 minutes with the engine running before she could move. That night, she opened the door to James's study for the first time since he had died. She had not been inside in 6 years. James had used it as his work-from-home space. The smell of his cologne was still faint in the curtains, sandalwood and bergamot. She sat in his chair. Riley lay down on the rug behind her, the way he always had when James worked late. She started with the desk drawer. The first folder she opened was bank statements. Joint accounts she recognized. Then a second account, in James's name only, with monthly transfers of $7,000 going to a property management company in White Plains, New York. The address was 412 Edgemont Lane. She had never heard of it. She kept opening drawers. There were airline receipts. Hartford to Boston, twice a quarter, just as he had said. But there were also Hartford to White Plains tickets, every other Friday for 14 years. There were phone records he had never deleted. A number labeled in his contacts as Boston office. The number had received 17,000 calls. In a box at the back of the lowest drawer, she found a stack of photographs. Tyler at 3. Tyler at 6, missing his front teeth. Olivia in a hospital bassinet with a pink knit cap. Ultrasound images dated 2010 and 2013. Birthday cards in handwriting she did not recognize. To Daddy, love Tyler. To Daddy, love Liv. She found a Father's Day card drawn by Olivia in crayon. The drawing was 4 figures and 1 dog. Olivia, James, Lauren, and a yellow golden retriever. The dog had a different face than Riley. The dog was younger. There was a second golden retriever in James's other house. Mary set the card down on the desk and put her face in her hands. Riley stood up from the rug and pressed himself against her leg, and she finally cried. She had not cried at the funeral. She cried now, for an hour, into the fur of a dog her husband had bought her with money he had been keeping from another life. She would not learn about Sarah Mitchell for another 8 days. Edward Hartwell called on a Friday morning, 8 days after the will reading. He did not say much. He asked if Mary could come into the office. He asked if she would be willing to sit in the same room as Lauren Reynolds. He said he had found something else. The 3 of them met at noon. Edward closed the conference room door behind himself. He laid a single folder on the table. James held a 3rd lease, he said. Manhattan, 5th Avenue and 82nd. $8,400 a month. 18 months running. Mary looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at Mary. Neither of them spoke. The lease, Edward continued, was in the name of one Sarah Mitchell, 29 years old, a junior associate at a midtown consulting firm. She had been listed in James's calendar as a client. She was, in fact, 4 months pregnant. To finance the apartment, James had taken second mortgages against both family homes, the one in Old Greenwich, where Mary lived, the one in White Plains, where Lauren lived. He had written Sarah's apartment off as a business expense. He had claimed both Mary and Lauren as dependents in different state filings. He had been, Edward said carefully, committing federal tax fraud for at least 6 years. Lauren did not cry. She had cried already, in private, in the parking lot. She looked at Mary across the table and spoke for the first time. "I'm a tax consultant," she said. "Give me his financial records, all of them." For the next 3 weeks, Lauren came to Mary's house in Old Greenwich. They worked at the kitchen table. They spread spreadsheets across the floor. They drank cold coffee and ate crackers and barely spoke unless it was about numbers. Tyler and Olivia stayed with their grandmother in White Plains. Riley took to Lauren. She gave him pieces of cheese when she thought Mary was not looking. Mary saw. She did not say anything. By the end of the 3rd week, they had a complete forensic file. 6 years of fraud, 3 properties, 2 marriages, 1 pregnancy, and enough documentary evidence to bury James Reynolds twice over. Mary and Lauren did not go to the press. They did not confront Sarah Mitchell. They did not raise their voices. What they did was file. Edward Hartwell, working pro bono for the first time in his career, drafted a joint motion identifying both women as pre-existing creditors of James Reynolds's estate. The motion froze every dollar James had left, including the funds he had earmarked for Sarah's apartment. A separate envelope, anonymous in origin, arrived at the regional office of the Internal Revenue Service. It contained 6 years of tax filings, 3 property leases, and a forensic accounting from a licensed tax consultant named Lauren Reynolds. Sarah Mitchell learned that James was dead from a local news segment about a settled estate dispute. She learned that he had been married to 2 other women from the same broadcast. The 5th Avenue apartment defaulted within a month. The bank repossessed it. The pregnancy went on without him. The estate was divided according to law. Mary kept the house in Old Greenwich and half of James's liquid assets. Lauren kept the house in White Plains and half of James's liquid assets. Tyler and Olivia received protected trust funds that Sarah could not touch. Adam, Mary's son, received nothing because he had asked for nothing. Mary and Lauren signed a mutual non-disclosure agreement. They were not friends, they did not call each other, but they were not enemies either. They had, in their own quiet way, saved each other. The last time Mary saw Lauren was on the courthouse steps the day the estate closed. Lauren reached out and touched Mary's arm very briefly and walked away. Mary drove home to Old Greenwich. She made tea. She sat on the back porch in the late October light. Riley lay down across her feet the way he always had. Her phone rang. Adam, calling from San Francisco. "Mom," he said, "are you alone out there?" Mary looked down at the dog at her feet. She smiled, for the first time in months. "No," she said, "I'm not." If this story stayed with you, if you've ever wondered how much of someone you love was ever real, subscribe. We tell these stories to remember that justice does not always come loud. Sometimes it comes quiet, in a courtroom, with a golden retriever lying at your feet.